Lockdown meant silence, not just of voices, but of time. Gates didn't rattle, keys didn't jingle. And for 73 straight days, not a single soul entered or exited Fulton Correctional Facility besides a rotating skeleton crew of guards. The virus had turned every hallway into a sealed vault, every cell into a tomb. For the women inside, it was like being buried alive. No visitors, no yard time, no chapel, no commissary line. Just the same recycled air, the same bitter trays of food, and the same haunting thoughts echoing between cinder block walls. But then, somehow, 3 of them got pregnant. It started with inmate Alyssa Monroe, age 29. A former pharmacy technician turned petty fraudster. Alyssa had done 2 years quietly, kept her head down. No write-ups, no trouble. When she requested a medical appointment in early April for what she described as exhaustion and nausea, no one blinked. That is, until Nurse Doyle returned from the infirmary wide-eyed, muttering under her breath, "She's pregnant." Warden Calvin Meeks didn't believe it at first. How could he? The last male inmate had been transferred 6 years ago. Visitation had been cut off entirely since the second COVID outbreak. There were no conjugal visits, no off-site work programs, and no private contact with the outside world. Everything was locked. Everything. He demanded a second test. It came back positive. Within days, 2 more inmates tested positive. Deja Carter, 35, in for armed robbery, and Sierra Langston, 24, serving 5 years for drug trafficking. Neither had shown any prior symptoms. Neither had filed medical complaints. But both were now nearly 12 weeks along. Identical gestation windows. The guard started whispering first. "That ain't normal," one muttered in the break room, tossing his plastic lunch tray down. "They've been sealed up tighter than Fort Knox. Either they've been messing with each other," another sneered, "or someone found a damn magic trick." The whispers turned to rumors. Then the rumors leaked out. Families started calling. Local reporters emailed questions. Advocates started probing. Something wasn't right. The prison's chapel, long shuttered under pandemic protocol, was reopened as an investigation command center. Meeks called in a private investigator with clearance from the state. Cameras were checked. Rosters reviewed. Medical logs combed through line by line. Nothing. No unexplained movements. No recorded entry from outside men. Every door badge accounted for. Every surveillance feed clean. Except something was wrong. Terribly wrong. Because Alyssa, Deja, and Sierra weren't even friends. They weren't in the same unit. They had different meal shifts, separate cell blocks, and didn't share the same guard rotation. They weren't caught in any hallways together. They didn't attend group therapy. They had no known overlaps. Yet they shared a biological reality impossible to ignore. Worse still, each of their pregnancy windows aligned with the same 2-week period in early February, a time when the prison was under strictest isolation orders due to a guard testing positive for COVID. In those 2 weeks, inmates were not allowed out of their cells except for supervised showers, medical emergencies, or direct movement between blocks under escort. No inmates were moved during that time. No volunteers entered. All deliveries were contactless and left at the gate. And yet, 3 inmates had been impregnated during that time. The Department of Corrections issued a tight-lipped statement. "We are conducting a thorough internal investigation and will hold any responsible parties accountable. At this time, we have no reason to believe there is an ongoing risk to staff or inmates." But inside Fulton Correctional, no one believed that. The women stopped sleeping. They flinched when guards entered their cells. Inmates began accusing each other of keeping secrets. Some said they heard strange footsteps late at night. Others swore they saw shadows and restricted wings. And in cell block D, someone carved into the concrete above their bed, "The walls ain't solid." Sierra Langston tried to keep her composure. She had always been the tough one, loud and unshakable, the one who could throw a punch and win a stare down with a guard. But when the nurse confirmed the pregnancy and held up the test, she trembled. "That's not possible," she whispered. I haven't touched a man in 3 years." Deja refused to speak. She paced herself for 6 hours that night, muttering to herself. At one point, she took off her prison shoes, tied the laces together, and hurled them at the ceiling until they lodged into the light fixture. The next day, she smeared soap on her mirror and wrote, "IT happened in the dark." Alyssa, meanwhile, was the only one who asked for counseling. But after 3 sessions with the prison psychologist, she shut down. In her 4th session, she said just one sentence before going completely silent. "He didn't come through the door." That single sentence made it to the desk of the lead investigator, a former homicide detective named Renita Holmes, now contracted to the Department of Corrections for internal audits. She circled the quote 3 times in red ink. He didn't come through the door. What did that mean? There were only so many ways into a prison, and even fewer ways into a maximum security women's block with reinforced gates, 20-foot perimeter fences, and 24-hour surveillance. But if it wasn't through the door, then what? A floorboard? A vent? A wall? Renita ordered a physical inspection of the architecture. A day later, a corrections officer flagged something odd in the schematics. A maintenance tunnel, marked decommissioned, running beneath cell blocks B and D. Sealed off during renovations in 2012. It wasn't on the digital blueprints. It wasn't covered in camera angles. And it was supposed to be inaccessible. Supposed to be. That night, Renita walked the path herself. Past the old laundry room. Past the rusted boiler. Down a locked stairwell most guards didn't even know existed. The air turned stale. Dust thickened the walls. At the end of the corridor, behind a rusted maintenance locker, she found a concrete slab, and beneath it, faint scuff marks, as if someone had moved it recently. She didn't sleep that night, because if there was a way in, a hidden way, then that meant someone had access. And worse, someone was still using it. The lockdown was supposed to be airtight. No visitors, no contractors, no outside personnel, unless absolutely necessary. For nearly 6 months, Holloway Correctional Facility had operated like a fortress. No touch, no exit, no loopholes. COVID protocols had forced the state into strict isolation procedures. But this wasn't about germs anymore. This was about something far more unsettling. The first rumor came from C Block. Inmate Kiara Jones had been quietly taken from her bunk in the middle of the night and escorted to the infirmary. She returned hours later, pale, distant, and unusually quiet. Her appetite was gone. She sat on the edge of her bunk for days, staring at the gray wall like it had answers she couldn't bring herself to speak. By week's end, everyone on the block knew. Kiara was pregnant. At first, no one believed it. Holloway wasn't exactly a place for hope. The idea of a baby being born inside these walls felt like a ghost story. But the whispers kept growing. Even the guards weren't denying it anymore. What nobody could understand was how. There hadn't been male visitors for months. No conjugal visits. No physical contact. The prison was on total lockdown. A week later, another name surfaced. Chandra Ellis. Another trip to the infirmary. Another ultrasound. Another secret that didn't stay buried for long. This time, panic started to bubble beneath the surface. Chandra was loud, confident, and angry. When she returned to her cell, she threw her jumpsuit at the wall and screamed so loud, it echoed through the corridor. She shouted at no one and everyone, her voice cutting to the stale air. I didn't ask for this. I didn't even touch nobody. Her words set off a storm. The guards began their internal checks. Medical staff were questioned. Cameras were reviewed. Female staff were interrogated. Every male correctional officer was placed under quiet surveillance, but there was nothing, no evidence of sexual misconduct, no gaps in security, no breaches in protocol. And then it happened again. Tamika Howe, a lifer who hadn't had a visitor in 4 years. Pregnant. By now, the prison felt like it had swallowed a secret so dark, so impossible, that even the walls seemed to buzz with dread. 3 women, 3 pregnancies, no male contact, no physical visitation, and 0 logical explanation. The medical staff, already under suspicion, were now divided. Nurse Alvarez, the head RN, swore under oath that the testing equipment had been verified twice. The pregnancies were real, each one between 6 to 8 weeks along. Blood tests, ultrasounds, hormone levels, everything pointed to the same conclusion. Conception had happened inside the prison during lockdown. Warden Gray assembled an emergency meeting with the Department of Corrections. Faces were pale, lips thin, as officials tried to explain how the impossible had happened under their watch. They ordered a full sweep of the facility. Every surveillance feed was combed, every interaction documented. There was talk of drugging, artificial insemination, even inmate-on-inmate assaults. None of it fit. No men, no visits. One investigator muttered under their breath. But baby bumps? It didn't take long before the gossip left the walls of Holloway and reached the media. A leak, a story, a headline too wild to ignore. 3 inmates pregnant with no male contact. Officials baffled. That's when the pressure really started. Families began calling. Civil rights groups demanded answers. Internal Affairs launched a third-party investigation, and the inmates, already living in a pressure cooker, started turning on each other. Chandra accused Kiera of lying. Tamika retreated into silence. Rumors swirled of secret affairs, masked medical staff, even artificial methods smuggled in from the outside. The prison's air grew heavier with every passing day, like the truth was waiting to explode. Warden Gray, a by-the-book man who had never once missed a disciplinary report in his career, started losing sleep. The idea that something so calculated, so invasive, could happen under his command kept him up at night. He personally reviewed 1,200 hours of surveillance footage. Nothing. No hidden visitors. No illicit staff behavior. No signs of coercion. That's when a different theory emerged, not from the investigators, but from the inmates themselves. They didn't touch us, Chandra whispered to another inmate during yard time. But they didn't have to. It was cryptic, strange, but it would make sense later. As the pregnancy investigations deepened, DNA samples were requested. The request hit a wall. All 3 women refused to disclose any information about the potential fathers. Even under pressure, none of them would talk. All they shared, quietly, in fragments, was the same unsettling truth. They couldn't explain it either. Something had happened. Something in the night. Something that didn't leave bruises or video footage, but it had left a mark all the same. Kiera described it like a dream she couldn't wake from. She remembered darkness, a sharp clinical smell, cold fingers against her skin, a hum in the air like a generator. Then nothing. Tamika never spoke a word, but she kept sketching. And what she drew was disturbing. A shadowy figure in scrubs, faceless, with gloved hands holding a long, silver instrument. Every time she finished one sketch, she tore it up and started again, like she was chasing a memory that refused to be real. Whatever had happened in Holloway Correctional, it didn't feel like a simple scandal anymore. It felt orchestrated, quiet, methodical, and it was only just beginning. The prison that had sealed itself off from the world was now unraveling from the inside. And with each week that passed, the baby bumps grew, and so did the fear. At first glance, Holloway Correctional Facility was a sealed vault, a fortress lined with steel bars, concrete walls, motion sensors, and 24-hour surveillance. But walls don't keep out secrets. And the deeper investigators pushed, the more they realized something was crawling to the belly of this prison, something no one had been watching. Internal Affairs had hit a wall. There were no visitor logs, no camera footage of misconduct, no signs of breach. But the pregnancy scandal had pushed the Department of Corrections into full-blown damage control, and Warden Gray was under direct pressure from the state's Attorney General. Find out what happened or resign. So they turned to the one thing everyone had overlooked, the old architectural plans. Buried in dusty storage files and scanned blueprints from 1967, the original schematics of Holloway revealed a forgotten truth. The prison had once been a mental institution. And back then, its design had included underground tunnels connecting the main ward to a separate treatment annex long since abandoned. Those tunnels were supposed to have been sealed when the facility was converted into a women's prison in 1983. But when the blueprints were re-examined, investigators noticed something strange. The tunnel system didn't show up on any modern maps of the prison. It had vanished from every digital record, every building audit, every renovation report. It was like it had never existed. Until now, a team of forensic architects was dispatched to Holloway. They began tracing wall thickness, measuring floor vibrations, and comparing heat patterns in the facility's foundation. In cell block C, directly beneath the laundry room, they found what they were looking for, a hollow echo behind a maintenance wall. It wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a ghost story. It was real. Behind a rusted maintenance panel, covered in decades of grime, was an old service door. It was hidden in plain sight, behind shelves stacked with mop buckets and ammonia. When pried open, the door groaned like it hadn't been touched in years, but the dust trail on the floor told a different story. Someone had been using it. The tunnel beyond stretched deep and narrow, lit only by the flicker of investigator flashlights. The air was damp and smelled like mildew and rust. The walls were lined with old piping and brick, and the silence was thick enough to suffocate. The team followed it for nearly 200 feet before it opened into a small, forgotten annex beneath the infirmary wing. That's when they found the first clue. Tucked beneath a workbench, latex gloves, a roll of medical gauze, and an unlabeled bottle of clear liquid. Beneath that, an old operating table covered with a thin plastic sheet. Whoever had been down here had been preparing for something. The discovery triggered an internal emergency. Warden Gray was livid. A full lockdown was ordered, not for COVID protocol, but for internal security. Every staff member was now under review. Every male employee was to undergo questioning. And still, the answers weren't coming fast enough. Then came the breakthrough. An IT tech named Jerome Harris noticed irregularities in the prison's motion detector logs. They had been dismissed earlier due to assumed animal movement. Rats, mostly. But Harris cross-referenced the motion triggers with scheduled guard rotations and lockdown hours. What he found made his stomach turn. For 12 nights over the past 2 months, motion had been detected in the maintenance hallway between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., right during third shift, when the cameras were supposedly on auto loop due to budget constraints. Only a handful of people had access to override the system. 3 names surfaced. 2 were ruled out. 1 was on medical leave during all 12 occurrences. The other had a rock-solid alibi logged into a control room upstairs. But the third? Officer Reuben Malik. A 38-year-old senior correctional officer, clean record, 10 years on the job. Never once written up for misconduct, the model of discipline. Except he had recently been reassigned from infirmary escort duty after an inmate complaint. Nothing concrete. No investigation. Just a transfer that quietly got swept under the rug. Reuben had keycard access to the maintenance wing. And on 3 of the same nights the motion sensors were triggered, his login ID showed brief windows of activity on the camera network. Enough to deactivate feeds for exactly 47 minutes. That was all internal affairs needed. Reuben was brought in for questioning. At first, he denied everything. Claimed he'd never been near the maintenance corridor. Said his logins were routine, part of shift protocols. He never broke eye contact. He never blinked. But when they showed him the tunnel photos, his pulse changed. Slightly. Enough for the polygraph to catch it. Still, he wouldn't talk. No confession. No admittance. Just a stare that seemed too calm, too calculated. Then the investigators went back to the hidden annex for a second sweep. That's when they found it. A burned-out security camera lodged in a wall crevice, smashed but not completely destroyed. The techs managed to recover a few seconds of blurry footage. It showed a shadowed figure in scrubs pushing a cart. On that cart, what looked like a fertility kit. A metal tray with syringes. Cryovials. It wasn't rape. It wasn't physical coercion. It was involuntary artificial insemination. The horror set in like a wave of nausea. Someone had accessed the inmates during the night, drugged them, used clinical tools, avoided physical contact, kept it sterile, mechanical, untraceable, and worst of all, he didn't act alone. Reuben might have been the one moving through the tunnels, but someone had provided the medical supplies. Someone had signed off on access codes. Someone had silenced the inmates afterward. This wasn't just a predator. This was a conspiracy. 3 women, 3 pregnancies, 1 tunnel, 1 name, and a growing sense that the truth had only just begun to surface. The real question now wasn't how it happened. It was, who else knew? And how many more secrets were buried beneath Holloway's concrete floor? The night the tunnel was exposed, Holloway Correctional didn't sleep. Rumors raced faster than guards could contain them. Inmates whispered through vent shafts. Officers turned on each other. Every corner of the prison pulsed with suspicion. And in the middle of the chaos, one inmate, shaking, sweating, unable to hold her guilt, walked up to the glass of the control booth and quietly said, "I want to talk. Alone." Her name was Tina Delroy, 31 years old, serving a 9-year sentence for wire fraud and identity theft. No disciplinary write-ups. No history of violence. Just another woman caught up in a fast money scam. But what she carried now was far more dangerous than fake checks or burner phones. Inside interview room C, she refused a public defender, asked for anonymity, and demanded one thing. "If I talk, you protect me. I want protective custody. Not general population. Not after this." They agreed, and then the dam broke. Tina began with confession. She was one of the 3 pregnant inmates. But it hadn't been some horrific midnight assault, at least not in the way people assumed. She had been drugged, woken up groggy, bleeding. But before that ever happened, there had been a deal. According to Tina, several inmates in cell block C were approached months prior by another woman, someone with power inside. Clarissa James, an inmate with ties that extended beyond the walls. Clarissa had connections on both sides of the bars. She was a queenpin of a prison hustle few outsiders knew existed. Clarissa had a pipeline, guards she could manipulate, staff she could bribe, and a silent partnership with a correctional officer who worked nights and had medical access, Reuben Malik. Clarissa made offers to women with no family, no money, no outside support. Get pregnant. You'll be compensated. No one will know. You'll do the time, but you won't leave here empty. Tina thought it was a joke at first. But when she saw another inmate, Brandy Little, suddenly sporting new commissary privileges, top-tier snacks, makeup, even a phone card, she realized Clarissa's offer was real. What she didn't realize, she said, was that it wasn't a clinic scheme. It wasn't artificial insemination through standard channels. It was underground, unsanctioned, and completely out of the inmate's control. Once you said yes, there was no undoing it. Tina was given what she assumed was a sedative, vitamins. Clarissa called them. Then she remembered being taken from her bunk in the middle of the night by a guard she didn't recognize at first, until she saw the tattoo peeking from under his collar. Reuben. She woke up later back in her bunk, dizzy and bleeding. She hadn't signed any papers. She hadn't even spoken to a doctor. But weeks later, she missed her period. Then another. Then the vomiting began. She panicked, tried to back out. That's when the threats started. Clarissa told her if she said anything, she'd never make it to parole. You don't understand who's behind this, she warned. This ain't just Reuben. You think he's smart enough to pull this off? This goes way higher. Tina broke down when she described the moment she realized she was trapped. She tried faking a miscarriage, slamming her stomach against the wall during showers. Another inmate caught her. Word got back to Clarissa, and suddenly, Tina was transferred to isolation for attitude issues. No records, no doctor visit, just punishment. Her silence had been bought with fear. Until now. But what shook the investigators the most wasn't her account of Reuben or Clarissa. It was a single name Tina let slip at the end of her interview, half-whispered, barely audible. Dr. Corinne Maddox. Corinne Maddox wasn't a household name inside the prison. She rarely made rounds. She wasn't a prison doctor. Technically, she was a contracted fertility specialist, part of a community outreach program meant to educate inmates about reproductive rights. Her visits were scheduled quarterly, always above board, always documented, until the logs were pulled. And that's when the lies began to unravel. Several logs had Corinne signed in for consultations on dates that didn't match the camera feeds. The logs showed her inside the infirmary. The security footage showed her SUV still parked at the staff entrance gate, never moved. Some of the signatures were almost hers, but subtle discrepancies in stroke and flourish told another story. The logs were forged. And even more damning, one of the night's motion was detected in the secret tunnel. Dr. Maddox's key card was used to access the staff pharmacy, except she had been on vacation in Arizona that week. Her travel photos were on Instagram. The timestamp matched. She wasn't even in the state. Someone had cloned her credentials. Reuben, Clarissa, forged logs, sedated pregnancies. It was all starting to piece together into something much darker than a few rogue guards breaking protocol. This was a coordinated operation designed to harvest pregnancies for a purpose no one wanted to admit aloud. Were the pregnancies for money, for black market adoptions, or something worse? The state's attorney general ordered an emergency grand jury and a wider investigation into Holloway's records dating back 5 years. Dozens of files were subpoenaed. And yet, every time investigators got close to someone with real power, someone who could blow it all open, they hit a wall of silence. Even Reuben Malik, now suspended and facing criminal conspiracy charges, refused to name names. I did what I was told, he said under questioning. You think I was the one giving the orders? I'm not stupid. But when asked who gave him those orders, he smiled and said nothing. The prison remained on high alert. Clarissa James was moved to solitary, but even there, her reach lingered. Inmates feared her. Some believed she had dirt on wardens, judges, even parole board members. Tina Delroy, now in protective custody, refused to say more. And Dr. Corinne Maddox? She denied everything. Claimed her badge had been stolen, her key card duplicated, her logs forged. I was a pawn, she told reporters. I had no idea. But the questions wouldn't go away. Why did her name appear so many times? Why had she approved medication shipments the prison couldn't explain? And why were 3 other pregnant inmates across 2 other state prisons also linked to her outreach program? The puzzle was bigger than Holloway. The manipulation ran deeper. And somewhere in the shadows of it all sat someone untouched, watching, waiting, untouchable. By the time investigators had pieced together the final fragments of conspiracy, the truth was already bleeding through the walls. Rumors had begun to trickle out of Gray Ridge Correctional Facility, whispered among correctional staff, and shouted between inmates through the pipes and air vents. But no one expected what came next. Not the media, not the state, and definitely not the families of the 3 women, now visibly pregnant, inside a maximum security facility where no man was supposed to have touched them. The name had been in the background report since the beginning. A man respected, feared, and rarely seen. Assistant Warden Lionel Griggs. He was a kind of figure whose authority echoed even when he wasn't in the room. He didn't fraternize. He didn't yell. He barely spoke. But everyone listened when he did. His office was located in the administrative wing, tucked behind 2 layers of security and a frosted glass door no one entered without invitation. Most believed he didn't involve himself in daily operations. That, it turned out, was exactly how he liked it. It was one of the pregnant inmates, Alyssa Banks, who finally broke the code of silence, but not in court. She did it in a medical ward interview, just after being rushed in with pregnancy complications. She was bleeding, scared, and exhausted. What she said shattered everything. "He's not just behind it," she whispered. "He is it. He made the rules. He broke them. And he told us no one would ever believe us." Investigators were stunned. Not because Griggs had been a suspect. He hadn't. He wasn't on any shift logs. He hadn't signed into any secure inmate areas. But the more they dug, the more the impossible unraveled into fact. A hidden access tunnel, decades old and forgotten by many, led from the oldest part of the prison's foundation into a storage room adjacent to the women's wing. Griggs had ordered renovations in that storage space 6 months prior. No one questioned him. But inside, behind a false panel, was a keypad entry door. The security footage, selectively looped. The logs, forged. The guards on duty, paid off, intimidated, or silenced. A different kind of court hearing began behind closed doors. Political figures scrambling to get ahead of the fallout. State prosecutors worked overtime to keep the leak from going national. But it was too late. A whistleblower from inside the Department of Corrections leaked documents to a local reporter, visitor logs, internal emails, and the taped testimony of Alyssa Banks. Within days, it exploded across headlines. Assistant warden implicated in pregnancy scandal. Female inmates silenced for months. 3 women, 1 secret. Inside the nightmare at Gray Ridge, protesters gathered outside the facility. Civil rights attorneys descended on the case. And quietly, behind prison walls, chaos spread like wildfire. But the story didn't end in a courtroom. A week before Lionel Griggs was scheduled to be arrested, an alarm sounded in Cell Block D. The body of Mia Corbin, the second pregnant inmate, was found unresponsive in her bed. No signs of trauma. No suicide note. The cause of death? Undetermined. But everyone inside knew what had happened. She had testified privately to a federal investigator just 2 days earlier. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a message. Griggs was finally taken into custody at his home, still in his press slacks and dress shirt, calm as if he just stepped out of a budget meeting. Cameras flashed. Reporters screamed questions. But he said nothing. Not when they read him his rights. Not when they showed him the photos of the secret tunnel. Not even when they played Alyssa's full testimony back to him, her voice shaking as she described the nights he slipped in and out of the prison wing like a ghost. He offered only one statement to the press. "I never forced anyone to do anything." They all agreed. They knew what they were doing. But no one believed him. What emerged during the trial stunned the public even more. Griggs had built a silent, manipulative system inside Gray Ridge that blurred the line between consent and coercion. He used promises of early parole, threats of solitary confinement, bribes to family members outside, and cold, clinical intimidation to silence and control the women. He convinced them no one would ever believe an inmate over a man like him. And for a long time, he'd been right. But with the evidence stacked high, with a grieving family demanding answers for Mia Corbin's mysterious death, the jury returned a swift verdict. Guilty on multiple counts of sexual misconduct, abuse of authority, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Ruled. But the damage was done. The Department of Corrections saw dozens of resignations. An internal probe revealed similar, though less extreme, misconduct across other facilities. Civil suits were filed. Policies changed. And 3 women, forever marked by their time inside, gave birth behind bars, alone, and under the shadow of a scandal that exposed how even the most controlled environments can hide monstrous secrets. One inmate wrote a letter from her cell, now circulated online. People asked how this happened. how we let it happen. But you don't understand. It's not about what we let happen. It's about what they made us believe we deserved. Now we know better. Now we speak. The prison may have silenced them for a time, but the truth found its way out. And behind that truth stood the man behind the wall, no longer in power, no longer untouchable. Just another inmate, waiting for Judgment Day.